That was the first truth the New Mexico territory carved into every soul who crossed it. The lesson lay in the split earth beneath one's boots, rode the dry wind that tasted of dust and distance, and burned beneath a sun that offered light but no kindness. Above it all stretched a sky too wide to care, a hard, endless blue that reduced men to something small and crawling. Along the horizon, mountains rose like bruised knuckles, jagged and unmoving, watching humans struggle with ancient indifference. By the 1850s, survival here had been stripped to its rawest needs: water, food, shelter, and the nerve to wake up and face another dawn. Wagons crept west carrying thin hope and worn bodies. The land promised everything and spared nothing. For the Apache, it was not a frontier or a gamble. It was home, an inheritance older than memory, where stone and canyon held voices of ancestors. Two worlds pressed against each other here, tight and volatile, like flint waiting for steel. Mera Knox felt that tension in her bones. It lived beneath the whistle of wind and in the guarded eyes of traders at the dusty San Miguel outpost. At 18, she still carried the pale softness of the Ohio Valley she'd left behind, a fragile contrast to this sun-scoured country. Her light hair fought constantly against dust and grit, and her blue eyes, once used to rolling green hills, now squinted against relentless glare. Most saw her as something delicate, misplaced, bound to wilt. They didn't see the iron beneath her calm exterior, shaped by early loss and a father's quiet dependence. They didn't notice the sharp intelligence behind her composed face, an awareness learning this hard land with steady resolve. Her father, Rowan Knox, was a good man, a carpenter by trade, strong with wood but ill-suited to violence. He saw the territory not as sacred ground or prize to be taken, but as a chance, space enough to build a life far from the press of the East. His love for Mera ran deep and protective, sometimes so tightly it felt like a cage. "Stay close," he murmured every time they made the long ride to town, his hand resting near the old rifle. "There are hard men out here." That day was no different. The trading post buzzed with collision, trappers in buckskin haggling over pelts, their scent of smoke and sweat thick in the air. Mexican families sold pottery and woven cloth in bright colors. A few U.S. soldiers, uniforms dulled by dust, laughed loudly over cards. And then there were the Apache. They moved with a quiet fluidity that belonged to the land itself. Mera found her eyes drawn to one man in particular. He was neither the loudest nor the eldest, but there was a stillness about him that commanded attention. Tall and lean, he carried the shape of a life spent under open sky. Dark hair brushed his shoulders, bound back with leather. His face was sharp, carved as if from canyon stone. Buckskin leggings, a plain tunic, arms crossed over a powerful chest. One silver bracelet caught the light against his sun-darkened skin. His eyes, dark, unreadable, missed nothing. He spoke in low tones while negotiating with the trader, switching easily between Apache and rough Spanish. He did not bargain. He stated terms. Holt Granger, sharp-eyed and usually slippery, nodded without protest, his bluster strangely absent. The warrior gathered flour, salt, and tinned goods with smooth efficiency. As he turned to leave, his gaze met Mera's. Only for a heartbeat, but the world seemed to stop. The look struck her like a physical blow, running through her from heel to crown. There was no warmth in it, no curiosity, only a deep, unsettling measure, as if he were seeing past her dress, past her manners, into something exposed and unguarded. She looked away first, heat rising in her cheeks, her pulse racing. Pretending interest in a bolt of cloth, She steadied her hands. When she dared glance again, he was gone. They left town in late afternoon. Sunlight slanted low, bathing the land in gold and rust. The air cooled, a quiet mercy. Their wagon creaked along the trail. Rowan hummed softly, pleased with the day's trade. "That new woodplane will change everything," he said with a smile. "We'll have those shelves up by Sunday." Mera smiled back, though her thoughts lingered on a pair of dark eyes that had already vanished into the land. The uneasy moment at the trading post was already slipping into something unreal, like a half-remembered dream. Bathed in late-day light, the land looked almost gentle. Jagged lines softened, shadows stretched long and forgiving, the colors deepened, burnt gold, rust, and crimson. In light like this, it was easy to believe in Rowan Knox's quiet dream of starting over, easy to imagine peace taking root. That illusion died the instant they rounded a bend of broken stone. 3 mounted men blocked the narrow trail ahead. They wore no uniforms. They carried no lawful authority. They were neither trappers nor soldiers. They were worse. Faces smeared with dirt and cruelty, clothes torn and sun-bleached, they sat their horses with the lazy confidence of predators. Their eyes gleamed like coyotes watching a wounded thing stumble. The man in the center was broad and thick-necked, his beard tangled, yellow teeth flashing as he grinned. "Well now," he drawled, voice rough as gravel. "Look what wandered into our path." "A man of faith," he went on, eyes flicking toward Rowan, then sliding to Mera Knox with slow intent. "And his pretty little songbird." Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop. His face drained of color as his hand crept toward the rifle. "We don't want trouble," he said. "Just let us pass." "Oh, we'll let you pass," the man chuckled, the sound like rocks grinding together. "After you pay the toll, rifle, supplies, and that fine watch peeking from your pocket." "That's all we have," Rowan pleaded, voice tight. "My daughter and I—" "The daughter," one of the others sneered. His gaze crawled over Mera, stripping comfort from her skin. "She's worth more than all of it." Fear hit her sharp and cold, but something fiercer surged beneath it. Heat. Rage. Mera refused to shrink. She would not be hunted prey. Rowan saw the look in their eyes and made a desperate choice. He raised the rifle. He never had a chance. The leader's pistol was already drawn. The hammer clicked, loud in the sudden hush. "I wouldn't," he said softly. "Drop it, old man, or the little bird loses her wings." Rowan's shoulders sagged. The rifle fell into the dust. The 2 others dismounted. One grabbed the horse's bridle. The other sauntered toward the wagon, reaching for Mera with a filthy hand. "Come on down, sweetheart," he said. "Let's have a better look." Instinct took over. As his fingers brushed her arm, Mera seized the heavy sack of sugar and swung with everything she had. It struck the side of his head with a dull crack. He stumbled back, cursing, stunned. The leader's grin vanished, replaced by fury. "Got some fire in you?" he snarled. "I like that." He dismounted and lunged, gripping her arm and yanking her from the wagon. Mera hit the ground hard, breath torn from her lungs. The stench of whiskey and sweat filled her senses as he loomed over her. "Let her go!" Rowan shouted, rushing forward, only to be dropped to his knees by the butt of a pistol. Mera stared up at the bearded man above her. Terror burned through her, but beneath it lay something unbreakable. She did not scream. She did not cry. She glared. Her eyes blazed with defiance, so fierce it felt like a weapon. She would fight. She would claw and bite and bleed, but she would not yield. That was when he came. Not from the trail, but from above. A silent shape detached from the canyon shadows, moving with deadly speed. The men never saw him until it was too late. The first bandit fell with a crushing strike to the throat, collapsing in a choking gasp. The second spun around, eyes wide, and froze. The cold barrel of Rowan Knox's rifle pressed against his forehead. Now held by Cale, now held in the hands of the Apache warrior, the rifle became something final. The man froze, letting his own weapon fall as if it burned him. The leader, still gripping Mera Knox, spun sharply and dragged her against his chest, shoving her forward as a living shield. The cold mouth of his pistol pressed hard against her temple. "One more step," he hissed. "Move, and she dies." The warrior did not move. The rifle remained steady in his hands, unmoving as stone. It was the man from the trading post, Kyle. His dark eyes locked onto the bandit, yet Mera knew, without knowing how, that his attention was wholly on her. He saw the fear shaking her body. He also saw the fire in her that refused to break. "Let the woman go," Kyle said. His voice was calm, low, and sharp enough to cut the air. It was not a plea. It carried no hesitation. It was an order. The bandit snarled, tightening his grip around Mera. "Drop the rifle, or—" He never finished the threat. Kyle shifted his aim in a movement too fast to follow, and fired. The shot did not strike the man's chest or head. It shattered his hand. Bone burst, the pistol flew free, and the scream that followed tore through the canyon like an animal's cry. The bandit staggered back, clutching his ruined hand, his hold on Mera broken. Kyle did not fire again. He advanced instead, slow, deliberate. His presence alone was more terrifying than another bullet. The remaining two men saw their leader writhing in the dust, and broke. They scrambled for their horses and fled into the fading light, abandoning him without a second glance. Kyle stood over the injured man, looking down with cold disregard. He nudged the fallen pistol into the sagebrush with his boot. "You're not worth the powder," he said flatly. Then he turned his back on him. The man, sobbing and bleeding, dragged himself to his horse and rode away, broken and humiliated. Silence settled over the canyon. It was broken only by Rowan Knox's ragged breathing as he struggled to his feet. The air stank of gun smoke and terror. Kyle's attention returned to Mera. He walked toward her and stopped a few steps away. She was still trembling, the shock catching up to her now that it was over. His gaze held the same intensity she remembered from the trading post. But it had changed. There was no pity in it. What looked back at her was deeper, older, a recognition beyond words. He took in the dust clinging to her dress, the wild light in her eyes, the way she stood upright despite everything. Unbowed, he saw the woman who had fought back with a sack of sugar. Rowan swallowed hard. "Sir, we owe you our lives," he stammered. "I don't know how to repay you. We have little money, but—" Kyle did not seem to hear him. His eyes never left Mera. The sun hovered low on the horizon, a burning edge of red and gold. Wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of dust and juniper. When Kyle finally spoke, his English was measured and precise. He did not address Rowan. He did not address Mera. He spoke to the land itself. "A warrior's spirit lives in her," he said, his voice steady and absolute. "This land will not break her. She will be protected. She will be honored." Then he turned his gaze fully to Rowan. His final words fell into the stillness like stone striking stone, unchangeable, binding. "She will be my wife." Kyle did not follow them. He faded back into the rocks, becoming part of the canyon once more, leaving Rowan Knox and Mera Knox alone in the ringing silence. The ride home felt unreal. The creak of the wagon wheels echoed too loudly in the twilight. Rowan's hands shook on the reins, his face caught between gratitude and a fear he could not yet name. He said nothing about what had happened, nothing about the warrior's vow. The words were too heavy, too foreign, too final. The moment struck Rowan Knox's life, like a stone dropped into still water. Everything he had believed solid rippled outward, distorted. Mera Knox sat beside him in the wagon, wrapped in a blanket and a silence of her own. Her body still shuddered from the memory of violence, but her thoughts spun wildly. She could not forget the warrior's eyes, dark, ancient, endless as the night sky. She will be my wife. The words echoed in her mind, not with passion or heat, but with the cold certainty of a mountain that does not move. It had not been an offer. It had been spoken as truth, as something already decided and witnessed by the land itself. Fear washed over her in dizzying waves, yet beneath it, quiet, unwelcome, undeniable, was another sensation. A strange sense of safety she had never known before. When they finally reached their cabin, it felt small and exposed beneath a sky thick with stars. For 3 days, a heavy, unspoken tension clung to the place. Rowan worked with frantic urgency, hammering, stitching, repairing, filling the air with the sounds of order as if noise itself could keep the wilderness and the warrior's claim at bay. He spoke of leaving, of California, of anywhere but this place where rules bent and promises carried weight he could not comprehend. Mera moved through her chores in a haze, senses sharpened to a painful edge. Every snapping twig, every shifting shadow sent her heart racing. She feared he would come, and feared just as deeply that he would not. Time had split cleanly in two, before the vow and after. He came on the morning of the 4th day. There was no hoofbeat, no voice from the trail. Mera was hanging laundry when the air changed, when the world seemed to still. The hair on her arms rose. She turned. Kyle stood at the edge of the clearing near the juniper trees, no more than 20 yards away. He was not dressed for war. Only a longbow rested in his hand, a quiver at his back. A freshly killed doe hung across his shoulder. Rowan stepped from the cabin, gripping a half-carved chair leg like a weapon, his face set hard. "What do you want here?" he demanded, fear tightening his voice despite his effort to sound firm. Kyle did not look at him. His eyes were on Mera. He moved forward without haste, laid the doe carefully near the woodpile, then straightened to face Rowan. "My word has already been spoken," Kyle said calmly. "I have come to speak with you, man to man." "There is nothing to discuss," Rowan shot back, stepping forward. "My daughter is not. She is not for you. We are not the same people." "Our worlds do not belong together," he continued, voice breaking now. "It wouldn't be right. The town would never accept it. It would shame her." Kyle listened without interruption. When Rowan finished, Kyle's jaw tightened. "Your town's shame is a whisper," he said evenly. "My honor is stone. I saved her life. My protection is my claim. She will eat when the land is empty. She will drink when streams fail. She will be safe from men who hunt in darkness. This is my promise." He was not boasting. He was stating fact. His survival, his strength, his ability to protect. These were the measures of worth in this land. Mera found her voice. "Father," she said quietly but firmly, "he did save us. We owe him at least the courtesy of listening." Rowan stared at her, disbelief and hurt etched across his face. Kyle turned slightly then, his dark eyes meeting Mera's. In them she saw something brief, recognition, perhaps approval. He had known she was strong. She had confirmed it. The meeting ended without resolution. Rowan refused his blessing. Kyle did not withdraw his vow. He left as silently as he had come, leaving the deer behind. That night, for the first time, they ate venison roasted over their fire. The meat was more than food. It was proof. A silent argument made where words had failed. Life settled into a strange, new rhythm. Kyle did not return to the cabin, yet his presence lingered constantly. Sometimes, while drawing water, Mera would spot him on a distant ridge. Still, watchful. He was not spying. He was guarding. When hungry coyotes crept too close to their lone goat, a flint-tipped arrow struck the dirt before them, and they scattered into the brush. When Rowan's axe handle split, a new one, smooth, strong mesquite, appeared leaning against the woodpile the next morning. These gestures spoke in a language Mera was only beginning to understand. He was not trying to charm her with trinkets or soft promises. Instead, he proved himself in the only currency that carried weight here: skill, strength, and an unshakable sense of duty. Slowly, Mera's fear loosened its grip, replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. She began to wonder about his people, his beliefs, and the way he seemed to read the land as if it spoke directly to him. She wondered what he saw when he looked across the same terrain that so often filled her with unease. The land answered that question itself. Late summer bore down hard. The heat grew merciless. The creek they depended on thinned to a sluggish ribbon of brown water. The air turned heavy, pressing against the lungs, and the sky shifted into a sickly yellow-brown haze. An old trapper passing through, old Brack, paused near their fence and spat tobacco into the dirt. "Sandstorm's coming," he muttered. "When the sky turns that color, the devil's beating his wife. Batten down." They did what they could. Shutters were fastened. Rags were stuffed into cracks around the doorframe. But they were people of the Ohio Valley. They understood rain-swollen rivers and snowbound winters, not a storm made of wind and earth. It struck at dusk. What began as a low moan grew into a deafening roar. The world beyond the cabin vanished into a spinning wall of sand. The storm hit like a physical blow. Wind screamed like something alive, flinging grit against the windows with the sting of buckshot. Sand forced its way through every opening, coating their tongues, burning their eyes, settling over everything in a fine, choking film. Their goat cried out in panic from its lean-to. Then came the sound that froze their blood. A sharp crack, followed by the tortured groan of tearing wood. Part of the porch roof had been ripped away. "The well!" Rowan Knox shouted above the chaos. "If it fills with sand, we're done!" They forced their way outside, heads down, handkerchiefs tied over their faces. The wind fought them viciously, clawing at their legs, threatening to hurl them to the ground. They struggled with the heavy wooden cover, but it caught the wind like a sail, wrenching free again and again. In the height of the chaos, through the brown haze, a figure appeared. It was Coyle. He moved with his body angled into the storm, not battling it, but working within its force. He said nothing. He simply set his shoulder against the well cover alongside theirs. With his added strength, they finally slammed it into place and dropped the locking bar. He moved next to the shattered lean-to, shielding the trembling goat with his own body, while he swiftly lashed the remaining roof boards with rope pulled from a pouch. Every movement was controlled, precise, calm, the exact opposite of the storm's fury. When there was nothing more to be done, they staggered back into the cabin, slamming the door shut against the howling world. All three were coated in dust, lungs burning, bodies spent. The cabin felt like the hold of a ship caught in open sea. For a long while, no one spoke. The storm raged on, a brutal reminder of how small they all were. Mera lit the lantern. Its soft glow pushed back the darkness. In the flickering light, she studied Kyle. His face was streaked with dirt, his hair wild, yet his eyes were steady. He was not a savior from some distant world. He was a man shaped by this one, someone who understood its violence and knew how to endure it. Hours later, the wind began to weaken, leaving an eerie silence behind. Without speaking, Mera moved to the hearth and built a fire. Her hands worked with new certainty. She cooked corn cakes and the last of the salted bacon. They ate quietly, gathered around the small stone fireplace. The fire lived at the center of the room. It crackled and breathed warmth into their aching bones. Yet it also marked a line. Mera and Rowan sat on one side, perched on simple stools. Kyle sat opposite them on the floor, back straight, at ease in himself. The flames were both bridge and boundary, shared heat, divided worlds. Mera broke the silence. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you watch over us?" Kyle looked from the fire to her face. "I gave my word," he said simply. "But you don't know me," she pressed, a need to understand rising in her chest. "I know your spirit," he replied, unwavering. "I saw it when you faced the men on the trail. It is strong. It does not bend. A spirit like that should not be left to the mercy of the wind." Rowan shifted uneasily, but he said nothing. Rowan Knox had seen what Kyle was capable of, what kind of man he was when the land itself turned hostile. In the aftermath of the storm, Rowan's old arguments about society, reputation, and shame rang hollow. They felt thin, almost foolish, compared to the force of nature they had survived together. Across the wavering firelight, Mera Knox watched Kyle in silence. The flames softened the hard lines of his face, revealing a depth and stillness she had once mistaken for coldness. He was profoundly different from anyone she had ever known. His customs, his beliefs, the way he moved through the world, everything about him belonged to a reality she did not yet understand. She was still afraid, not of him, but of what he represented. To step toward him meant crossing into a world she could barely imagine. Yet as she sat there, warm and protected while the wind reshaped the land outside, something within her began to thaw. Fear remained, but it had tangled itself with respect, and with something far more dangerous, a quiet pull, slow, steady, undeniable, a gravity drawing her toward the man seated across the fire. When the storm finally passed, the land emerged scrubbed raw beneath a generous sun. New channels cut through the earth. Cottonwood leaves lay scattered, stripped bare. The world looked altered. So did their lives. Rowan's open hostility toward Kyle faded. What replaced it was not acceptance, but a reluctant, wordless respect. Fear lingered, yet it was now the fear of a father watching his daughter drift toward a current too powerful to stop. What followed, the settlers might have called a courtship, though it bore no resemblance to parlor visits or polite conversations from Mera's old novels. Kyle's courtship belonged to the land. It was silent instruction, practical teaching, a careful unveiling of the desert's hidden knowledge. He brought no flowers. Instead, he showed her the deep-rooted plants whose crushed leaves could cool a burn or draw fever from the skin. He wrote no poems. He taught her how the earth spoke, how to read a coyote's passage in dust, how to judge the wind by the bend of juniper branches. The open country became their classroom. Rowan watched from the cabin, forgotten tools at his feet. He saw his daughter kneel beside Kyle, heads bent over tracks pressed into dry ground. He saw Kyle point skyward, explaining the path of a circling hawk. He saw Mera, once startled by every movement, walk now with quiet assurance, eyes lifted, reading the horizon. Between them, a new language formed, one of small, meaningful contact. When Kyle showed her how to find water, he guided her hand to the base of a plant, his calloused fingers brushing hers. The touch was brief, deliberate, and it sent a shock through her that had nothing to do with the heat. When he taught her to shape an arrow, a skill he insisted she learn, his hands covered hers to correct the angle. A woman who can provide for herself, he told her calmly, stands as a queen. His warmth lingered. His closeness stole her breath. Each touch sparked something unspoken. Each shared glance smoldered. Mera began to see beyond the image of a hardened warrior. She noticed his patience when she failed at a knot for the third time. She heard quiet amusement in his voice when a rabbit easily outwitted her clumsy stalking. She learned that his silence was not emptiness, but attentiveness. Kyle, in turn, learned from her. He watched with fascination as she tended her struggling garden, marveling at her persistence in coaxing life from unyielding soil. He tasted the bread she baked in her stone oven, unfamiliar, but nourishing. He listened as she hummed the soft hymns of her childhood, melodies shaped by faith and longing different from his own, yet not unfamiliar. Through her, he saw a world built on quiet rituals and small comforts, a fragile order carved from wilderness. He came to understand that her strength was not only defiance, but grace that endured. Yet as their bond deepened, Mera's inner conflict sharpened. The world she came from held strict rules for women. Marriage had always felt like a closing door. Her will folded into another's, her independence surrendered. To marry Kyle would not be the closing of a door. It would be a leap from a cliff. Could she abandon everything she had been taught? The love growing inside her felt like a betrayal of herself, wild and dangerous, like a weed breaking through carefully tended ground. Kyle, too, fought his own struggle. A warrior's instinct was to claim, to guard, to protect what was his, and that instinct was growing stronger by the day. Each time Kyle saw her, the instinct rose sharp and undeniable. To lift Knox onto his horse and carry her away to the safety of his people's camp. It was a primal pull, older than thought. He wanted her not only for the strength of her spirit, but for the gentle curve of her neck when she tilted her head, for the way sunlight caught threads of gold in her hair, for the faint blend of lavender and wood smoke that followed her like a memory. Yet his vow had been forged from honor. The very spirit that drew him to her was one that could never be confined. To force her would be to shatter the thing he revered most, and so he fought himself daily, holding back the fire of impatience, shaping his desire into restraint, tempering a warrior's will with a tenderness he had never known he possessed. He understood now that he had to earn more than her presence. He had to earn her trust. The turning point came on a night when the moon hung full and silver in an ink-black sky, so bright it felt close enough to touch. Its light washed the land in a soft glow, smoothing away the harsh edges carved by the day. They shared a quiet meal of roasted rabbit and corn cakes. Rowan Knox, sensing the weight of what hovered unspoken between them, withdrew into the cabin with a murmured excuse about mending a harness, leaving the two alone by the dying fire. The flames had settled into glowing embers. The desert lay silent, wrapped in cool stillness. Under the moon's steady gaze, Mera felt courage rise where fear had long lived. She needed to understand. "Kyle," she began, her voice barely more than breath. "In my world, when a woman marries, she belongs to her husband. She is expected to obey." She could not bring herself to look at him, fixing her gaze on the pulsing coals. "I am not made to be commanded." Kyle was silent for a long moment. Moonlight traced his profile in silver and shadow as he studied her. When he spoke, His voice was low, softer than she had ever heard it. "My people see this differently," he said. "A man does not own a woman. He does not own the land. He does not own the sky. We are all children of the earth, placed here to walk in balance." He turned toward her fully. "A husband and wife are not master and servant. They are hos-ho, harmony." "He is the mountain," Kale continued, "strong and unmoving, a shield against the storm. She is the river that flows at its base, giving life, shaping the land. The mountain is barren without the river. The river is lost without the mountain to guide its path." His dark eyes searched hers. "Your spirit is a great river, Mera. I would not cage it. I would stand so it may flow safely." Her breath caught. His words reached into the deepest places of her fear and eased them. He saw her, not as something to claim, but as something to honor. The dread that had followed her for weeks loosened, replaced by emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. This time, it was no accident. Her fingers brushed the back of his where it rested on his knee. An unspoken question, a quiet surrender. Kyle turned his hand slowly and wove his fingers through hers. His grip was warm, steady, an anchor amid the storm inside her. They sat that way, hand in hand, suspended in a world of silver light and deep shadow. All the careful steps of their courtship, forward, back, waiting, had led them here. Later that night, lying in her narrow bed, moonlight spilled across the wooden floor like a pale ribbon. Kyle's words echoed in her thoughts. He is the mountain. She is the river. It was a vision both beautiful and terrifying. Love bloomed in her chest, new, fierce, aching like an open wound. Yet beyond their quiet moment lay a larger world, the whispers of San Miguel, the judging stares, the weight of her own people's scorn. A storm was gathering beyond the moonlit horizon. Miles away, Kyle sat alone beside the dying embers of his own fire, staring up at the same moon. He could still feel the softness of her hand in his. The warrior within him was at peace. The bond had been acknowledged. But the man knew the truth. To truly be her mountain, he would have to stand against more than desert dangers. He would have to face the far more treacherous terrain of hatred and prejudice dividing their worlds. Above him, the moon shone calm and untouched. It lit the path ahead. A path that would demand not only his strength, but all of his honor. And with that, he committed not only his strength, but his entire heart. Nothing was spoken aloud. The choice was sealed in the quiet clasp of their hands beneath the moon's silver glow. It became a truth that lived between them, solid and immovable as the mountains lining the horizon. The following morning, when Kyle came to the cabin, there was no more talk of lessons or slow courtship. He and Mera Knox stood together before Rowan Knox. One look at his daughter's eyes told him what words never could. Something in him finally gave way. The shoulders that had held firm in resistance for weeks sagged with tired surrender. His fight was finished. He could not offer his blessing with joy, but he would not block her path. Word of the coming union traveled fast, carried on wind and whispers. In San Miguel, brows knitted and voices lowered. Among the Apache camps, heads turned and murmurs spread. It was an unsettling thing. A crossing of lines meant never to meet. Preparations began. Each step became a careful negotiation between two worlds that had only ever faced one another across gun barrels or trading counters. Rowan, clinging to the last threads of his own world, insisted on a preacher. A message was sent with a passing trapper. A week later, Reverend Asa Merrick arrived, thin, pale, and uneasy. He carried his Bible like armor, his eyes filled with pity as he looked at Mera, as though she were being led toward something dangerous and unholy. Mera worked with unsteady hands to sew her wedding dress. It was not the white silk she had once imagined, but a simple gown of pale blue calico, the finest cloth she owned. Practical, sturdy, fit for a frontier woman. Along the collar, she stitched a row of dried desert flowers, a quiet acknowledgement of the world she was stepping into. Kyle prepared according to Apache tradition. He chose a sacred place, a wide, shallow alcove carved by ancient winds into the base of a towering red rock mesa. Stone walls would carry their voices. The open sky would bear witness. He summoned Knox, his uncle and a respected ceremonial singer, to offer the proper blessings. Each choice was deliberate, each act a beam laid carefully across the divide separating their worlds. The wedding day broke clear and mercilessly hot beneath a cloudless sky. Two groups approached the rock alcove from opposite directions, keeping distance like cautious animals circling the same ground. From the east came the settlers. There were few of them. Rowan walked stiffly in his Sunday suit, uncomfortable and ill at ease. Holt Granger and Lenora Granger followed, faces tight with uneasy curiosity. Reverend Asa Merrick stood apart, sweat darkening his black coat, expression grim. They clustered together, an island of civilization in a vast, untamed sea. From the west came the Apache, on foot and horseback. There were many more, nearly 20. Kyle's kin, his clan. His mother, Elkai, stood among them, dignified and still. Her face bore the beauty of age, etched with wisdom and sorrow. Nearby were cousins, elders, and Knox. And there was Voran. The young warrior stood with arms crossed, his expression dark. To him, this union was a dilution of blood, a concession, a betrayal. When Kale arrived, he wore ceremonial dress instead of hunting leathers. A finely woven blanket rested across his shoulders. A single eagle feather was tied into his dark hair. He was not merely a man that day. He was the living embodiment of his people's pride. He approached the settlers first. Stopping before Rowan, Coyle bowed his head slightly, respectfully. "I have come for your daughter," he said, his voice calm and resolute. Rowan swallowed hard. His throat tightened. With a slow nod, he brought Mera forward. She looked fragile and radiant in her blue dress. She placed her hand in Kyle's. Her pale fingers disappeared into his sun-darkened grasp. Together they walked to the center of the alcove, positioning themselves between the two watchful factions. The ceremony began when Reverend Asa Merrick stepped forward. His voice sounded thin and strained against the towering red stone. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Words that might have felt comforting inside a small wooden church now sounded strange and hollow beneath the open desert sky. He spoke of Adam and Eve, and the land listened in silence. He spoke of a wife's duty to submit, of a God who dwelled far above the red earth beneath their feet. Kyle stood unmoving, patient and composed, honoring this part of the rite for her sake alone. His eyes never left Mera Knox. She listened to the familiar words, feeling a quiet ache for the life she was leaving behind. When Reverend Asa Merrick finished, he stepped back, uncertain and visibly unsettled, as if unsure whether his words had found a home in this place. Then Knox stepped forward. He was bent with years, his body worn by time, yet his eyes were sharp and alive, like a hawk's. He began to chant, his voice low and rhythmic, carried in the Apache tongue, a sound that seemed to rise from the ground itself. He spoke of the first man and first woman, born of the sacred mountains, of walking the pollen path of beauty and balance. From a small, finely woven basket, he used a gourd dipper to sprinkle water to the 4 sacred directions. Then he took a pinch of yellow corn pollen and brushed it gently across their heads and shoulders, symbols of life, fertility, and harmony. The 2 ceremonies could not have been more different. One sent words upward to a distant heaven. The other drew its power from the living earth beneath their feet. The air grew heavy with attention, with the weight of centuries of misunderstanding pressing in. When the chants and prayers faded, silence followed, broken only by the whisper of wind through the canyon walls. They turned toward one another, unaware of the many watchful eyes surrounding them. Kyle looked at Mera, and in that moment, no one else existed. He saw not a settler woman, not an outsider, but the fierce, luminous spirit he had sworn to protect. When he spoke, his voice, often hard as stone, was filled now with solemn reverence. "I stand before you," he said slowly, clearly, not as a warrior, but as a man who has seen the river's spirit in you and the strength of the mountain. "For all to hear," he continued, "I swear to protect you as I protect the earth that gives us life. I swear to honor you as I honor the ancestors who guide my steps. My home will be your home. My people will be your people." He paused, his gaze deepening. "My heart is the shield I place before you, for all our days." A tear slipped from Mirea's eye, cutting a clean path through the dust on her cheek. The weight of his vow settled over her like a sacred covering, safety, devotion, and love woven together. Now it was her turn. She looked at him, at the man she loved, and spoke from the deepest place within her. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "I came to this land afraid," she said softly. "A stranger." Her eyes never left his. "You taught me to see its beauty. You quieted my fear." She drew a steadying breath. "I am yours. I have never known another love but you." To the settlers, her words sounded like tragic surrender. To Voran and the skeptics among the Apache, they seemed an absolute pledge. But to Kale, they were the purest gift she could offer, her whole heart, her unguarded trust. He lifted his hand and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. In that single, tender motion, the marriage was sealed. There was no celebration. As the ceremony ended, a heavy, awkward silence settled. The 2 groups did not mingle. Lenora Granger looked at Mera with a mixture of pity and grim fascination. Voran stepped forward, muttered sharp words in Apache, then turned away, his disapproval unmistakable. One by one, the people dispersed, fading back into the land they belonged to. Only Rowan Knox remained. He stepped forward and pulled his daughter into a fierce, desperate embrace. "Be happy, Mera," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "That's all I ever wanted." He held her once more, then turned and walked toward his wagon without looking back, a solitary figure leaving his greatest treasure behind. At last, they were alone. The sun dipped below the mesa, streaking the sky with fire and violet. The air cooled. Kyle took her hand. It was done. They were husband and wife, bound by vows spoken in 2 tongues, witnessed by 2 worlds. Without a word, he led her away from the sacred alcove toward a small, newly built hogan facing the rising sun, toward their life together. Ready to face their first dawn together, the weight of ceremony slowly lifted. What remained was something quieter, closer, and far more frightening. The silence of the wedding night pressed in on them. The walk to the hogan felt endless to Mera Knox, each step echoing with the finality of choice. The sun had slipped away completely, leaving the sky bruised purple, darkening into black overhead. The quiet between her and Kyle was no longer the easy calm of shared lessons in open country. It was delicate, brittle, charged with everything neither dared speak. Every pace beside her husband carried her farther from the girl she had been, and deeper into a thrilling, terrifying unknown. The Hogan stood solid against the starlit horizon, breathing the scent of fresh pignon and damp earth. Foreign, yet strangely comforting. Kyle drew back the heavy blanket that served as a door and waited for her. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into another life. Inside, the space opened wider than it appeared from without. A single round room, clean and intentional, shaped by purpose. A fire pit lay at the center beneath a smoke hole that framed a perfect circle of deep blue night. Sheepskins were arranged neatly on a raised bed of earth. A few clay vessels and woven baskets completed the room. This was his home. Now it was hers. The thought swayed her. Without a word, Cale knelt at the fire pit. With flint and steel, he coaxed a spark to life. Kindling caught, and soon a gentle fire crackled, chasing shadows along the curved walls in warm bands of gold and amber. Heat filled the room, but it could not touch the cold that had settled in Mireya's bones. She remained by the door, hands clenched, her wedding dress suddenly feeling like a borrowed skin. This was the moment. The end of girlhood, the beginning of wifehood. Her thoughts tangled, her father's grief-stricken face, the preacher's stern cautions, the coarse jokes she once overheard at a market fair. She had been taught that this part of marriage was a burden, private, endured, unspoken. A trial wrapped in silence. She felt unready, frightened by a mystery she had never been allowed to understand. Cale finished with the fire and turned toward her. In the soft light, his features gentled, his eyes deep and searching. He looked at her, his wife, with a quiet warmth she had never seen before. Not triumph, not demand, something guarded and reverent. He had fought for her. He had sworn for her. Now he stepped closer, intention clear in the calm of his expression. He expected her to come to him, to meet the moment. Her body betrayed her. As his hand lifted toward her face, she flinched. Small, instinctive, unmistakable. In the hushed space, it sounded like a shot. His hand stopped mid-air. Concern replaced confusion in his eyes. He lowered his hand, and when he spoke, his voice was careful, gentle enough not to fracture the quiet. "Mireya," he said softly, "are you afraid?" She could not speak. She only nodded, tears tight in her throat. Shame burned through her, shame at her fear, at her weakness, after all his patience and honor. "Of me?" he asked, and there was a note of hurt he could not fully hide. "No," she whispered at last, the word tearing free. She lifted her gaze, pleading for understanding. "Never of you. I am afraid of this." She gestured towards the bed, the close walls, the meaning of the night. "I don't know what is expected. I don't know how to be a wife." The confession lingered between them, heavy and fragile. Kyle's brow tightened, not in anger, but in confusion. He did not yet understand. In his world, he had taken a wife. She had come to him of her own will. What followed should have been as natural and unquestioned as sunrise. Seeing his uncertainty only deepened Mireya Knox's panic. The careful restraint she had clung to finally shattered, and the truth spilled out in a rush of whispered words, shame laid bare by honesty. "The preachers, the older women," she said, her voice breaking. "They speak of a wife's duty, of a debt she owes her husband." Her breath hitched. They speak of it in hushed voices, as something painful, something to endure. Tears slid free. I know so little, Kyle. My mother died before she could tell me these things. I know nothing. I'm afraid I will fail you. Afraid I'll disappoint you." When she finished, her eyes dropped to the packed earth floor. Her whole body shook with the force of her confession. She stood before him stripped of nothing but pride and illusion. She was no longer the defiant girl who had faced bandits on the trail, nor the capable woman who had learned the language of the desert. In that moment, she was simply a frightened soul, innocent, overwhelmed, crushed beneath a lifetime of fear and silence. Kyle remained still, listening. And as her words settled, understanding dawned within him, slow, profound, and irrevocable. He had seen her strength, her fire. He had assumed that a woman so brave, raised among settlers, would understand the ways between a man and a woman. But now, looking at her trembling before him, he saw past the courage to the core of her being. Untouched, unspoiled, innocent. Her vow at the wedding echoed in his mind. "I have never known another love but you." He had heard it as loyalty. Now he understood it as truth. She knew nothing of love, nothing of men. Her fear was not of him, but of a shadow, of stories passed down by frightened people who spoke of marriage as burden instead of blessing. He had believed he was claiming a woman. Instead, he had been entrusted with the heart of a girl standing at the very edge of womanhood, a heart taught to fear what should bring joy. In that instant, his vow transformed. Protection no longer meant only standing between her and the dangers of the land. The true honor lay in being worthy of the trust she had just given him. The fire of his desire did not disappear. It changed, tempered, purified, reshaped into a tenderness so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. Kyle stepped back. The space he gave her was deliberate, respectful. The confusion left his face, replaced by a patience deeper than stone. He crossed to the fire and sat, folding his legs beneath him on the far side. He gestured for her to sit as well. The flames, once a line between two worlds, now became their shared hearth, a place of safety and warmth. "There is no debt, Mera," he said softly, his voice steady as water over smooth stone. "There is no duty like the one you were taught." He met her gaze with quiet reverence. "In my world, a man doesn't take what isn't freely given. That isn't the path of beauty." He paused. "What a husband and wife share is not a burden. It is a gift, a ceremony meant for joy, not fear." "Your people taught you to be afraid," he continued gently. "I will teach you not to be." He reached for a thick wool blanket and stood. When he approached, she flinched again, fear still alive in her, but he did not touch her skin. He simply draped the blanket around her shoulders, his fingers brushing her arms for only a heartbeat. "Tonight," he said, his words a vow, "you will sleep. You will not be afraid." His eyes held hers, steady and sure. "I am your husband. My heart is your shield, and that shield protects you, even from me." He went back to his place by the fire, leaving her wrapped in the blanket, and in something warmer still, the certainty of his words. He banked the flames until they settled into a quiet bed of glowing coals, then lay down on the sheepskins on his side of the hogan. He turned his back to her, giving her the privacy of the entire space. Mera Knox remained where she was for a long while, gripping the blanket as the tears finally came. They fell silently, cleansing rather than fearful. They were not tears of terror, but of relief, of a love so deep it felt as wide as the desert sky. Their wedding night was not an ending. It was a beginning. Not a joining of bodies, but a joining of trust, faith in his restraint, in his honor. Kyle had given her something greater than passion. He had given her patience. He had given her safety. He had claimed her as his wife, and in doing so, he had freed her. The days that followed unfolded in a quiet season of discovery. Inside the sanctuary of the Hogan, sheltered from the hard judgments of the outside world, a fragile, luminous intimacy began to grow. Kyle kept his vow. He did not rush her. He courted her spirit anew, teaching her the words his people used for the stars as they turned overhead, sharing stories of the coyote trickster beside the fire, offering a tenderness she drank in like water after drought. And Mera, released from the prison of fear, began to open like a night-blooming flower. Her laughter slowly filled the round, earthen home. Her touch grew surer, more curious, as she learned the language of love at his patient, reverent pace. Their life together formed a circle, like the Hogan itself, contained, complete, with the fire as its center. But a circle can also be a mark. Their peace was too rare, too profound to go unchallenged by the world beyond it. News of their union traveled from the wedding site on the tongues of Holt Granger and Reverend Asa Merrick, racing through the dusty streets of San Miguel like a grass fire. The story twisted as it spread. Mera was no longer a woman who had chosen her life. She became a poor, stolen thing, a white dove in a savage cage. Reverend Asa Merrick thundered from his makeshift pulpit about a soul lost to heathen ways, his words stoking fear and righteous fury. Women who had once greeted Mera with polite nods now whispered behind their hands as Rowan Knox bought supplies, his face set in a mask of quiet pain and endurance. The men were less subtle. Their prejudice, fed by cheap whiskey and the brutal grind of frontier life, sharpened into something dangerous. They saw Cale's marriage not as love, but as defiance. A claim on something they believed he had no right to touch. Bram Calder, hard-eyed, ambitious, his hunger for land as wide as the territory itself, became the loudest voice among them. "It ain't right," he declared in the saloon, slamming his palm on the bar. "Let one of them take one of our women, and next they'll think they've got a right to our land, our water. It's a challenge, and a challenge has to be answered." The poison spread outward. An Apache family who came to trade found Holt Granger's prices suddenly doubled. A trapline Coyle had tended for years was smashed, the animals stolen. Small, vicious acts, sparks cast before a blaze. The unrest did not stop with the settlers. Among the Apache, Voran's jealousy curdled into open criticism. He saw Coyle spending his days teaching his white wife instead of hunting with the warriors. "He softens," Voran muttered to the younger men. "The white woman weakens his spirit. He thinks of her comfort before the needs of the clan." He spoke to pride and fear, and some began to listen. Kyle, once a natural leader, felt the cold edge of isolation from his own people. He had promised Mera he would be a mountain. Now he stood like one alone, caught between two gathering storms. The breaking point came on a hot, merciless afternoon. Kyle had gone to check the distant traps, a journey that would keep him away until dusk. Mera was inside the Hogan, grinding corn. The steady rhythm of stone on stone was comforting in the silence. Her new life had given her peace, but it had also sharpened her senses. She heard the horses before she saw them. The sound was wrong. Too many. The hoofbeats were heavy, aggressive, not the light, practiced tread of Apache riders. She stood and stepped outside, her heart beginning a slow, pounding drum. 4 riders approached through the heat shimmer rising from the baked earth. They were white men, armed with rifles. Bram Calder rode at the front, his face carved into a hard mask of purpose. 3 other ranchers flanked him, their expressions a mix of grim resolve and nervous excitement. They reined in a few yards from the Hogan, forming a dusty, threatening half-circle. None of them dismounted. "Afternoon, ma'am," Bram Calder said at last, his voice stripped of courtesy, heavy with intent. His eyes traveled over her, slow and assessing. He took in the simple Apache-style tunic she wore, the way her hair was tied back with a plain leather cord. He glanced past her shoulder at the order of the place, the bundles of drying herbs, the neatly stacked firewood, and his mouth twisted into a faint sneer. "We've come for you." Fear tightened in Mera Knox's stomach like ice, but her wedding vows rose clear in her mind. "My heart is your shield." And she understood, in that instant, that the shield had to protect her husband as well. She lifted her chin, meeting his stare without flinching. "I don't know what you mean. This is my home." "This is no home for a Christian woman," one of the men snapped. "It's a sty. We're taking you back to your own kind." "My kind?" Mireya's voice stayed calm, but it cut sharp as obsidian. "My kind are people who show respect. People who don't ride up to a woman's home with rifles and threats. You are not my kind." Bram Calder's face hardened. He had expected tears, gratitude, pleading, anything but this steady defiance. It enraged him. "Listen to me, girl. Your father's worried sick. The whole town is. You've been out here for weeks. God knows what that savage has done to you, what ideas he's put in your head. We're here to save you from your own foolishness." He shifted in his saddle as if to dismount. Mireya stepped forward at once, planting herself squarely in front of the Hogan's entrance. It was all she had, this small, round home, and she would defend it with her life. "You will not enter my home," she said, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned them into silence. The fear was still there, fluttering wildly inside her chest, but it was held fast now by love and certainty. "My father knows I'm safe. I am not a prisoner here. I am a wife." She looked at each man in turn, her blue eyes blazing with a fire none of them had ever seen in a woman. "My husband is a man of honor, something you clearly know nothing about. He has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. You see a savage. I see the man who saved my life. I see the man I love." She drew herself up, small in frame, yet impossibly strong. "I am his wife. No one has the right to separate us." A tense, ugly silence followed. The men shifted uneasily in their saddles. This was not how it was supposed to go. Bram Calder's face darkened with rage and humiliation. He opened his mouth, to order them forward, to take her by force. Then another sound reached them. Soft, deliberate, the unmistakable tread of a single horse. Kyle appeared at the edge of the clearing. He did not ride fast, yet his approach carried a lethal grace that made the air seem to tighten. A longbow rested in his hand, an arrow already set to the string. He brought his horse to a halt beside the Hogan, a silent shadow drawn straight from the land itself. He did not look at the ranchers. His eyes were on Mireya, on her stance, her fire, the way she stood guard over their home. A fierce pride surged through him, so powerful it almost hurt. She was the river, strong and unyielding, and she was magnificent. Then he turned his gaze to the four men. It held no heat, only finality, cold as a winter night. He did not need to speak. His presence alone was a promise of violence, swift, absolute, unavoidable. The ranchers felt fear sink its claws into them. They were armed men, but they knew what stood before them. A warrior bound to this land, a man whose name was etched in survival. Bram Calder broke first. His bluster collapsed under that silent stare. He yanked his reins, his face blotched red with fury and shame. "This ain't over," he snarled, the words hollow even as he spoke them. He wheeled his horse and spurred it hard. The others scrambled after him, hooves pounding, dust choking the air as they fled. not as rescuers, but as routed intruders. Their righteous crusade shattered against a woman's will and a warrior's vow. Kyle remained mounted until the sound of their retreat faded into nothing. Then he dismounted, lowered the bow, and crossed to Mera, who stood trembling now that the danger had passed. He said nothing. He simply stood before her, his eyes filled with awe and love deeper than any words. He lifted a hand and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. She had been his shield. And as they stood together in the ringing silence of the desert, they both knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The settlers would return with their story, a tale of a defiant, bewitched woman and a dangerous Apache warrior. But the truth stood there between them, unbroken, rooted as stone. The Apache would hear of how white men had ridden straight up to a warrior's home. What had begun as scattered sparks of hatred smoldered into a low, dangerous fire. A line had been scratched into the dust between two worlds, and it was a line that would soon demand more than words to hold. The quiet after the rancher's retreat was not peace. It was the held breath before thunder breaks. Kyle moved with a new, coiled alertness. His eyes never rested, sweeping the horizon, reading signs in the dust and wind that Knox could not yet see. He spent long hours with her now, not teaching the gentle lessons of the land, but the hard language of defense. He made her practice with the bow until her fingers blistered, not to turn her into a hunter, but into a protector. He showed her how to bar the hogan door from within, where the hidden caches of water and dried meat lay buried nearby. He was preparing his home for a siege, and his wife for war. "You are the heart of this hogan, Mera," he told her one night, his voice low and grave as the fire crackled between them. "If the walls fall, the heart must live. Do not fight for the home. Fight for the life inside it. Your life." She listened, her own heart tightening with a cold, unfamiliar dread. The circle of their life had been broken, and wolves were gathering. Those wolves forged their own unholy pact. Bram Calder, his pride festering like an infected wound, did not send word back to San Miguel. Instead, he rode into the shadowed canyons where desperate men lingered. He found what remained of Slade's pack, leaderless, hungry, burning with resentment. He offered them coin, supplies, and the promise of revenge against the Apache warrior who had shamed them. To this poison, he added betrayal. Through quiet, dangerous meetings, Bram Calder reached out to those among the Apache who resented Kyle's choice. One name answered his call: Voran. The offer was simple. Help them set an ambush. Kyle would be removed as a weakening influence. The white woman would be taken and returned to her people, and Voran's standing among the warriors would rise. Blinded by jealousy and wrapped in a twisted sense of honor, Voran agreed. He told himself it was not betrayal, but necessity, a harsh correction for the good of the people. He would not strike Kyle himself. He would only make sure Kyle was there, and exposed. The attack came on the third day, as the sun began to bleed red into the western sky. Earlier that afternoon, Voran rode to the hogan under the mask of reconciliation. He spoke of a mountain lion seen near the northern ridges, and suggested they hunt together, warriors side by side, as they once had. Kyle, wary but bound by honor, could not refuse without opening a public rift. He accepted the challenge. "I'll be back before full dark," he told Mera. She watched him ride away beside Voran, a knot of ice tightening in her stomach. A woman's instinct, sharp and unreasoning, screamed the truth. It was a trap. The ambush waited in a narrow pass of jagged stone and deep shadow. Kyle sensed it a heartbeat too late. As they entered the choke point, Voran reined in his horse, a signal. The crack of a rifle shattered the air. The bullet tore through Kyle's shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, his head striking rock, the world flashing white. Before he could rise, they were on him. Bandits pouring from the rocks, faces twisted with hate. And behind them, Bram Calder, his eyes shining with cruel triumph. Cale fought like a cornered lion. Injured and outnumbered, he became a storm of violence. He shattered one man's arm with his bare hands. He drove another back with a knife ripped from his boot. But it was too much. A second shot grazed his thigh. As he stumbled, a bandit plunged a blade into his side. A raw cry was torn from him as he dropped to his knees, the world dissolving into a red haze. Bram Calder stepped forward, rifle lifted, his smile slow and vicious. "Not so proud now, are you, Injun?" At the hogan, Mera heard the distant rifle shot. The sound cut straight through her heart. She did not hesitate. All of Cale's warnings, all her fear, fused into a single, burning purpose. She would not run. The heart of the hogan would not flee while its shield lay broken. She seized her father's old rifle, the one Cale had taken from bandits and kept ready. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it as she fumbled the cartridges into place. She checked the powder. Her mind found a strange, cold calm at the center of her terror. She was no longer Clara Mae Thompson, the carpenter's daughter from Ohio. She was Mera Knox, Cale's wife, and her husband was in danger. She ran, feet flying over ground she knew by heart, the heavy rifle awkward in her arms. She followed the echo of the gunfire, lungs burning, breath tearing free as she raced toward the pass where fate waited. Every instinct in her screamed as she neared the pass. She heard Bram Calder's voice, thick with triumph, and slowed, dropping into a cautious crawl. She used the rocks the way Kyle had taught her, keeping low, letting stone and shadow hide her. When she eased around a boulder, the sight below seared itself into her soul. Kyle, her husband, her mountain, was on his knees. Blood soaked the red sand beneath him. Voran stood off to the side, rigid, his face carved into a mask of torment. The betrayal was complete. And Bram Calder stood before Kyle, lifting his rifle, ready to end the life of the man she loved. Time stretched thin. Thought vanished. Only instinct remained. Mera raised the rifle. The barrel felt impossibly heavy, trembling in her hands. She had never fired it before. She braced it against the boulder, the way she had steadied her bow so many times, drew a breath, and stared down the long iron line. She centered the sight on one thing, Calder's broad, hateful back. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her like a hammer, throwing her hard against the rock. The explosion shattered the air. When she opened her eyes, Bram Calder lay on the ground, screaming, clutching a shoulder torn apart by the shot. The aim had been wild, but it had been true enough. The world exploded into chaos. The bandits, stunned by fire from an unseen hand, faltered. For a heartbeat, they forgot Kyle entirely. Voran jerked his head up toward the rocks, disbelief flooding his face as he saw Mera standing there, smoke curling from the rifle, her expression pale and unyielding. In that instant, Kyle surged. With a last raw roar of strength, he hurled himself at the nearest bandit, driving his knife home. The man fell, and Kyle collapsed beside him, his strength finally spent. Mera did not hesitate. She scrambled down the rocks, ramming another cartridge into the rifle as she ran. The remaining bandits saw her coming. This was no frightened settler girl. This was a she-wolf defending her mate. Their nerve broke. They dragged the screaming Bram Calder onto a horse and fled into the deepening dusk, hooves pounding, fear at their backs. Voran remained. He looked from Kyle's broken body to Mera advancing toward him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. He could not meet her gaze. With a cry torn from shame and anguish, he mounted his horse and fled, traitor to both worlds, belonging to neither. Mera dropped to her knees beside Kyle. He was unconscious. His breathing was shallow. His body was a map of wounds. The sand around him was dark with blood. Grief hit her like a blow, stealing the air from her lungs. For a terrible moment she thought he was gone. Then she felt it, faint but real, the fragile flutter of life at his neck. He was alive. She tore strips from her dress, hands moving with desperate precision. She packed the deep knife wound in his side, pressing down with everything she had to stop the bleeding, her tears mixing with his blood. The gunshot wound in his shoulder was a ruined mess. Nothing she could fix here. She had to move him. He was dead weight, far too heavy to lift, but she would not leave him. She hooked her arms under his shoulders and began to drag him, inch by brutal inch, toward the Hogan. Every rock fought her. Every root tore at her. Her muscles screamed. Her lungs burned. She fell. She rose. She pulled again. Her progress carved a slow, bloody trail through the dust. Thought vanished. Only movement remained, driven by a love so fierce it felt inhuman. It took an eternity. When she finally hauled him across the threshold of their home, she collapsed, shaking, her strength gone. But rest was a luxury she could not afford. She barred the door. Then she turned back to her husband. In the dim glow of the dying fire, she saw the full truth of his injuries. Death crouched in the shadows of the Hogan, waiting. And Mera Knox went to war with it. She cleaned his wounds with the last of their clean water. She remembered the leaves he had shown her, the ones that fought infection, and crushed them into a thick poultice, her hands stained green and red. She stitched the gash in his side with her sewing needle and fine thread, her stitches small, steady, exact. Her focus was absolute. She forced water between his lips. She cooled his burning brow. She stayed with him, breath by breath, refusing to yield ground. The night pressed in around them, and Mera stood her ground against death itself. Sometime in the deepest stretch of night, help finally came. Driven by guilt and fear, Voran fled to the clan and confessed what he had done. Before dawn, Elkai and Knoxai arrived at the Hogan. When Mera Knox opened the door, they stopped short, struck silent by what they saw. The Hogan had become a battlefield infirmary. Their warrior lay between life and death. And this white woman, this outsider they had once mistrusted, was covered in his blood. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried tears. Her hands were red and shaking, but her eyes burned with a fierce, unyielding light. She had not fled. She had fought. She had dragged her husband home, and now stood guard over his very soul. In that moment, the blood spilled outside the Hogan took on a different meaning. It was no longer a mark of division, but of shared sacrifice. Elkai knelt beside Mera. She no longer saw a settler woman. She saw a daughter, a warrior. Elkai placed her hand on Mera's trembling shoulder, and without a word, they joined together. Two women from different worlds, bound by love for the same man, fighting side by side to keep him alive. For 3 days and 3 nights, Kyle hovered in the narrow space between this world and the next. Time lost all shape. It was measured only by the rise and fall of his chest, by the smell of smoke, herbs, and blood inside the Hogan. Mera did not sleep. She existed in a state of fierce vigilance, Her world narrowed to the man on the sheepskins, the medicines, and the steady presence of Elkai beside her. Elkai's hands carried the wisdom of generations, the old ways to call a spirit back from the edge. Mireya's hands carried stubborn devotion, the refusal to let go. They worked in silence, cleaning wounds, changing bindings, feeding him water and broth drop by drop, fighting the fever with cool cloths and prayerful focus. The line between their worlds vanished. They were no longer settler and Apache. They were two women fighting for their son, their husband. On the second day, Rowan Knox arrived. He had heard the rumors in San Miguel of bloodshed, of his daughter raising a rifle. What he found shattered every story. Mireya's dress was torn and stained. Her body was exhausted, but her eyes held command. She was the heart of this small fortress, and she was holding it. Rowan brought bandages, medicine taken from Holt Granger, then stepped back, understanding with painful clarity that his daughter no longer needed his protection. She had forged her own. On the morning of the fourth day, Kyle's fever broke. He surfaced slowly, climbing up from darkness. The first thing he saw was Mireya's face above him, pale, drawn, and radiant in the morning light slipping through the smoke hole. He tried to speak. No sound came. She saw his eyes focus, and a sob broke free from her chest. She pressed water to his lips. "Kyle," she whispered. His name was a prayer. Recovery came slowly, painfully. Each day he grew stronger, and each day he watched her. He saw her confidence, her calm authority, the way she worked beside Elkai, not as a child, but as an equal. He saw the respect between the two women. The girl he had married, the fearful, innocent one, was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by blood and love, strong as the desert itself. His love changed. What had begun as a vow to protect became something deeper, a bond of equals, two spirits tested and bound by fire. He had promised to be her mountain, but she had been his river, the force that refused to let the mountain fall. News from outside slowly reached them. Bram Calder lived, but his shoulder was ruined. His shooting arm was useless. Worse than the injury was the loss of his power. His men had fled, not from a warrior, but from a lone woman with a rifle. His crusade ended in shame. Voran's fate was quieter and crueler. He returned to the clan and confessed. He was not killed. He was cast out, exiled to wander alone. A man without a people, haunted by his own jealousy. The bloodshed brought no glory, only loss for those who chose hatred. When Kyle could finally stand, leaning on a staff and Mireya's shoulder, they stepped out of the hogan together. Sunlight washed over them. The air felt new. They stood there for a long time, hands clasped, breathing. The world had changed, and so had they. "This place," Kyle said at last. His voice was still rough, his eyes resting on the hogan that had been their refuge and their hospital. "It carries too much shadow now." Mireya knew he was right. A future could not be built on ground soaked in pain and blood. "Where will we go?" she asked. Kyle looked east, toward the faint, dusty line of the settler's world. Then he turned west, toward the open desert and the lands of his people. "We will walk the space between," he said. They found a small, abandoned adobe cabin tucked into a stand of cottonwoods beside a narrow creek, land claimed by neither side. It sat at the desert's edge, close enough for Cale to reach his family, yet near enough that Rowan Knox could visit without an exhausting journey. It was a place of balance, a bridge. They rebuilt it together. Rowan came often, his heart slowly healing as he watched his daughter's real happiness take shape. He repaired the roof and fitted a solid wooden door. Kyle, his strength returning day by day, showed Mera how to mix adobe mud with straw. She laughed as they smeared the thick earth on the walls, splattering each other like children. Elkai brought blankets and clay pots. She showed Mera how to build an outdoor oven where she could bake bread over coals beneath the open sky. Their home became a blending of two lives. Inside stood a proper bed frame Rowan had built, set near a traditional loom Elkai had given Mera. Clay pots filled with desert herbs rested on shelves beside tin plates and coffee cups. It was theirs. Nothing else like it. Proof of a love that refused to be fenced in by borders. Mera was no longer a girl. She was a woman. Fear no longer lived in her heart. In its place was quiet strength and an endless capacity to love. She moved with purpose now, with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. She belonged here, at his side. One evening, as autumn's first chill sharpened the air, they sat outside their cabin watching the sky ignite with sunset colors. The land lay still, peaceful. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Kyle asked softly. Mera thought of Ohio's green hills, of the future she had once imagined. It felt distant, like a faded photograph of someone else. "I miss my mother," she said honestly, "but my life didn't begin until I came here, until I met you." He took her hand, their fingers threading together. He studied them. One dark, scarred, and calloused, the other fair, slender, but hardened now by work and survival. "When I first saw you," he said, his gaze drifting to memory, "I saw a spirit the desert could not break. I vowed to protect it." He turned to her, his eyes holding a love as vast as the sky above them. "I was a fool," he said quietly. "A proud fool. I thought my love was a shield meant to stand in front of you." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "Your spirit needs no shield, Mera Knox. It is fire. My love is only the wood I will feed it for the rest of our days." They spoke then of the future, of children with her blue eyes and his dark hair, children who would learn the songs of his people and the hymns of hers, children who would speak two languages and belong to both worlds. A generation born not of hatred, but of a love tempered by fire. Kyle rose and drew her to her feet. The first stars pricked the twilight sky. He took both her hands in his. "At our wedding, I made a vow," he said, his voice low and sacred. He repeated the words he had once spoken, but now they carried deeper meaning. "I swear to protect you as I protect the earth beneath my feet. I swear to honor you as I honor the spirits who came before me." His grip tightened, not repeating old words now, but forging new truth. "But more than this," he continued, emotion thick in his voice, "I swear to walk beside you, not ahead of you. You are the river, and you are the mountain." "You are my heart," he finished softly, "and my life is yours. We will walk in beauty until our spirits are called home to the stars." They stood together in the deepening dark, foreheads touching, the wind carrying his renewed vow across the silent desert. The last image of their struggle was not blood on sand, but this peace. A dawn followed. Red and gold light spilled over the horizon, bathing their small home in warmth. Hand in hand, Mera and Kale watched it rise. Together, on their bridge between worlds, their figures stood in silhouette against the newborn light. What bound them needed no words. Love carried on the wind, settled into the dust, enduring beyond time itself. The promise they shared did not fade. It became part of the land, quiet and everlasting. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.